From pipeline prisoner to Pacific power, Canada's quiet energy revolution. A geopolitical shockwave has just rippled through the global energy map, and this time, it wasn't triggered by Middle Eastern turmoil or a Kremlin maneuver. It came from the quiet, forested shores of British Columbia, where Canada, without fanfare or fireworks, launched its first ever overseas shipment of liquefied natural gas, LNG, bound straight for Asia. It wasn't just a cargo, it was a message, one that said, loud and clear, Canada is no longer playing second fiddle to American energy politics. On June 30, 2025, the Gaslog Glasgow departed the newly completed LNG Canada terminal in Kitimat, carrying 2.66 million tons of LNG across the Pacific. For more than 3 decades, nearly 100% of Canada's exported gas flowed through pipelines into the United States, over $8 billion worth in 2024 alone. But this maiden voyage to Asia marks a tectonic shift, a break from a decades-old dependency, and a bold step toward energy sovereignty. For years, Canada was locked into an imbalanced trade relationship. U.S. tariffs, 25% on most imports and a further 10% on energy products, turned Canadian gas into a geopolitical pawn. Donald Trump's trade war weaponized this dependency, squeezing Canada's energy sector with every tweet and policy memo. That chokehold became the catalyst. Canada realized it had to break free. And it did, quietly, strategically, and with a vision that would reshape the balance of power. At the center of this transformation is LNG Canada, a $40 billion megaproject in Kitimat. But this isn't just an export terminal, it's a strategic pivot point. It's the first direct maritime gateway between Canadian gas reserves and Asia's insatiable energy markets. With new capabilities to compress gas to -165 degrees Celsius and reduce its volume by over 600 times for overseas shipping, Canada now bypasses traditional U.S. pipeline routes and taps directly into global trade lanes across the Pacific. Before, it could take 20 days to reach Asia via the Panama Canal. Now, just 10 days straight from Canada's west coast. It's not just about efficiency, it's a geostrategic shift that slashes transit time, sidesteps American influence, and opens a lucrative new front in global energy competition. And the demand? It's massive. Japan is looking to boost LNG capacity by 20 million tons annually starting in 2026. South Korea plans to expand its storage infrastructure by 50% over the next decade. China has already signed multiple long-term supply contracts, preparing for a winter of escalating energy need. In this high-demand environment, Canada's entry couldn't be more timely. What makes Canada even more attractive is its stability. Unlike Middle Eastern suppliers mired in conflict or Russia's gas entangled with geopolitical brinkmanship, Canada offers what Asia craves: consistency, democratic governance, and clean energy credentials. This isn't just a sale, it's a partnership built on trust. But that trust didn't come cheap. The road to Kitimat was anything but easy. Harsh terrain, unforgiving weather, and some of the strictest environmental regulations in the Western world made this one of the most expensive LNG projects on the planet. To ease the burden, British Columbia's government introduced targeted carbon and sales tax incentives. These measures sparked heated debate. Should taxpayers foot the bill for corporate giants? Yet, they also helped deliver something Canada never had before: freedom from American pipeline politics. And this isn't just a win for corporations. During the 7-year construction phase, LNG Canada created over 50,000 jobs and signed more than $5.8 billion in contracts with local businesses and Indigenous communities. The Haisla Nation, whose land includes the Kitimat area, now holds equity in the Coastal Gas Link pipeline, a 700-kilometer artery connecting inland shale fields to the coast. It's not just inclusion, it's ownership. Technologically, the terminal is a feat. It runs primarily on hydroelectric power, making it one of the lowest emission LNG facilities globally. Equipment from Japan and the US was carefully selected to minimize carbon output, positioning Canada not just as a gas exporter, but a clean energy leader. With this, Canada is no longer shackled to a single buyer. It has options, it has leverage, and for the first time, it has true energy independence. No longer is it just a polite neighbor in Washington's economic backyard. Now, it's a strategic actor on the world stage, charting its own course. On its own terms, redefining alliances, Canada's energy pivot shakes the global order. As the LNG Canada terminal comes to life, it doesn't just pump gas, it pumps power. With each ship that departs from Kitimat's shores, Canada is writing a new narrative, one of independence, of calculated ambition, and of a cold, strategic detachment from American unpredictability. This isn't just about fuel. It's about leverage in a world being reshaped by energy politics. In the past, Canada's energy sector walked a tightrope, reliant on U.S. infrastructure, vulnerable to U.S. tariffs, and at the mercy of U.S. political mood swings. One executive order could disrupt billions in trade. One presidential tweet could erase months of contract negotiations. That's no longer the case. The shift to maritime LNG exports doesn't just diversify logistics. It rewires Canada's position in the global energy hierarchy. And what a time to pivot. Asia's hunger for LNG is soaring, driven by climate goals, industrial growth, and a need to decouple from Russian pipeline gas. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China are racing to lock in reliable supply lines. Japan, which imports over 80% of its energy needs, sees Canadian LNG not just as fuel, but as a geopolitical hedge. For South Korea, LNG is a buffer against the risks of relying on the Middle East. For China, it's a long-term stabilizer in a region constantly in flux. And here's the twist. These countries aren't just customers, they're investors. LNG Canada is a multinational endeavor. Japanese, Korean, Chinese, and Malaysian firms are equity stakeholders in the project. This isn't a one-way trade, it's an alliance. By spreading financial risk and sharing strategic vision, Canada and its Asian partners are building more than infrastructure. They're creating an energy pact that could define the Pacific Rim for decades. But building a global LNG empire isn't just about capital and construction. It's about credibility. Canada knows that energy buyers are no longer swayed by volume alone. They want low-carbon fuels. They want transparency. They want projects that honor environmental commitments and social inclusion. That's where Canada plays a trump card few others can match. The project's environmental record is solid. 2 liquefaction trains at the Kitimat terminal are capable of producing up to 14 million tons annually, and they run primarily on hydroelectric power. That's a big deal, in an age when carbon intensity is being factored into procurement contracts. Canada's Clean Energy Foundation is more than a selling point, it's a strategic moat. There's more. The involvement of the Haisla Nation isn't window dressing. It's a model for inclusive development, with direct equity participation in the Coastal GasLink pipeline and ownership in the nearby Cedar LNG project. The Haisla are not just stakeholders, they're co-architects of this energy vision. It's a structural shift in how energy development is done, and the world is watching. Global buyers are increasingly tying contracts to ESG, environmental, social, governance, metrics. Canada's performance, fueled by hydropower, guided by transparent regulation, and built with Indigenous inclusion, is giving it a reputational advantage over traditional exporters like Qatar or Australia. In a market where perception can be as powerful as pricing, that matters. Still, this is no victory lap. The road ahead is steep, and the competition is only getting tougher. Qatar's North Field expansion will soon deliver over 100 million tons of LNG annually. The United States is aggressively expanding Gulf Coast terminals with flexible delivery contracts that appeal to buyers wary of rigid long-term deals. Australia is strengthening its grip in Southeast Asia with new offshore fields and regional partnerships. So, What does Canada do? It accelerates. Plans are already underway to double LNG Canada's capacity from 14 million tons to 28 million tons per year. That would catapult Canada into the top 5 LNG exporters globally. But the jump won't come cheap. It will require tens of billions in new investment, expanded pipeline infrastructure, and potentially a second marine terminal. And all of it must be built under one of the strictest environmental compliance regimes in the world. Carbon pricing, provincial oversight, federal scrutiny. These aren't obstacles, they're litmus tests. If Canada passes, it won't just grow, it will lead. But Canada's leadership won't be decided in boardrooms alone. It will play out in shipping lanes, in investor meetings, and in living rooms across the country. Because at home, the public is watching too, and they're demanding accountability. More than ever, Canadians want to know: who benefits from LNG expansion? Are Indigenous communities getting more than photo ops? Are environmental safeguards actually being enforced? Are the revenues flowing fairly into communities and public services? These are not fringe questions. They are central to maintaining the political and social license to operate. And if Canada can get that balance right, between economic ambition and ethical action, it won't just be an exporter of LNG. It will be an exporter of a new model for energy development in the 21st century. The geopolitical map is shifting. And for the first time in a long time, Canada isn't just reacting, it's shaping the lines itself, steering the future, energy, sovereignty, and Canada's global rebirth. With each LNG tanker that sails from Kitimat's Pacific coast, Canada is doing more than supplying fuel. It's declaring something far more profound: that the age of one-dimensional trade dependencies is over. This isn't just an energy story, it's a story of sovereignty, foresight, and an assertive new role in shaping global equilibrium. The numbers are staggering. The Montney Formation in British Columbia and Alberta holds an estimated 160 trillion cubic feet of marketable natural gas, making it one of the largest reserves in North America. This basin, once a landlocked symbol of Canada's pipeline captivity, is now a launching pad to the global energy market. And the appetite abroad is ravenous. Japan, still reeling from its post-Fukushima pivot away from nuclear energy, is actively seeking secure, long-term LNG supply contracts. Canada, with its stable institutions, clean energy profile, and relatively short shipping routes, offers an ideal match. South Korea is scaling up storage capacity. China, pursuing energy diversification, views Canadian LNG as a stabilizing agent in a volatile regional market. These are not trends, they are tectonic shifts. But credibility will only carry Canada so far. The next chapter demands agility. Countries like Qatar are racing ahead with the North Field expansion, aiming to produce over 126 million tons of LNG annually by the early 2030s. The U.S. Gulf Coast is adding new capacity at lightning speed, fueled by investor flexibility and deregulated permitting. Australia continues to press its advantage with regional diplomacy and offshore production. Canada must be bolder. That means accelerating Phase 2 of LNG Canada, but also pushing forward with new projects like Cedar LNG and Kasi Lisam's LNG, both of which include Indigenous leadership at their core. These terminals not only diversify Canada's export options but also reflect a changing development model, one that integrates environmental responsibility with shared economic ownership. And that matters, especially now, as Europe moves forward with carbon border adjustment mechanisms and Asian countries begin linking carbon intensity directly to pricing structures. Canadian LNG's low-emission profile becomes a premium asset, powered by hydroelectricity and supported by rigorous methane detection and emission controls. Canadian LNG is not just competitive, it's future-proofed. Still, innovation must accelerate. That includes large-scale investments in carbon capture and storage, electrification of upstream production, and real-time emissions monitoring. Canada must also foster deeper research partnerships with universities, Indigenous communities, and environmental organizations, to ensure that technology and transparency go hand in hand. Domestically, the stakes are equally high. Canadians are watching closely, not just for environmental compliance, but for justice. The financial benefits of this energy boom, royalties, job creation, and infrastructure investment, must be shared equitably. Indigenous inclusion, once seen as an afterthought, is now the litmus test for legitimacy. The Haisla Nation's equity participation in Cedar LNG is more than a milestone, it's a message that Indigenous communities are not just voices to be consulted, but partners to be empowered. International buyers are paying attention. In an age of ethical sourcing and environmental justice, Canada's governance model is a key differentiator, and one its competitors often struggle to match. But Canada cannot afford complacency. New LNG players are emerging in Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Innovations in small-scale LNG and floating terminals are challenging the dominance of megaprojects. Add in global supply chain disruptions, geopolitical shocks, and regulatory uncertainty, and it's clear, Canada must not only build, it must adapt. That requires better coordination between federal and provincial governments, streamlined permitting, transparent tax regimes, and reliable environmental review timelines are no longer bureaucratic details, they're competitive advantages. Delays or uncertainty could drive investors elsewhere, just as global LNG demand reaches a new peak. The risk? That Canada becomes a case study in lost potential, a nation that had the resources, the credibility, and the opportunity, but couldn't move fast enough. The reward? A multi-billion-dollar economic engine that fuels domestic prosperity, enhances foreign policy leverage, and positions Canada as a beacon of responsible energy development in an era of global upheaval. This isn't just about energy, it's about agency. Every shipment that leaves Kitimat is a symbol of a nation breaking free from old assumptions, of a resource-rich economy refusing to be pigeonholed, of a country embracing complexity, from climate policy to community partnerships, and emerging not just as an exporter, but as a leader. Because in the 21st century energy game, volume is no longer enough. What matters now is values. Canada's LNG strategy isn't just about feeding demand. It's about redefining how energy gets to market, who benefits from it, and what kind of world it helps build. If successful, it could become a template for other nations facing the same dilemma: how to transition from regional reliance to global influence without sacrificing integrity. And so, the June 30, 2025 voyage wasn't merely the start of a trade route. It was a declaration of intent that Canada is done waiting, done complying, done being overlooked in the global energy conversation. From pipeline prisoner to Pacific powerhouse, Canada is now writing its own playbook, and the world is taking notice.